Morning.
Good morning. How are you doing, Bill?
Okay, look at that fancy background. Wow. I'm gonna I'm turning the volume down on my phone. All right, good morning. Well, seems like we have plenty of time, but then again, we also know that time sort of melts away. Um, do you have a specific prompt that you want to start with?
Um, let's no, I'm just like thinking like the intentional society one would be what's alive right now, but it can be slightly more um yeah, what is your general experience or what are general experiences in your life that create a sense of more energy, more lust, more motivation, desire to move, those kinds of things.
Okay. I think what I didn't mean to trick you, but I think part of your answer circles around to where my if you like autistic like brain goes. This was like, well, what is aliveness to start with? We use it a lot, and I it's a label, but I don't think we all agree on what it is. And I was thinking about, so the intellectual side is like, what is aliveness? Not am I feeling alive? What does that prompt even mean? Um, so then we can go to, well, how do we contrast it? Well, what's deadness? I mean, um, so I don't think it's binary. I don't think, well, in some respects, you're either alive or you're not. That's silly, but that's where the brain starts. But for me, at least in this moment, I'm thinking that aliveness it's a sort of a sliding scale and has something to do with energy. If I feel energetic, excited, perhaps, or what you say, then maybe I'm more alive. And if I'm feeling, depressed or down or whatever, I'm less alive. So to me, maybe aliveness has to do with that energy. And then, it's a question of, is it how I show it? That is, if I'm energetic, talkative, upbeat, um, is it how I show up? Or is it how I actually feel? I mean, maybe I feel really alive, but I'm just sitting quietly and I'm not exhibiting my aliveness to the outside world. How alive am I? Right? And, for myself as someone who is aware that I mask a lot of the time, is my masking aliveness real or fake? Am I really alive if I go to a party and I interact with people and I sort of, joke or show my sense of humor or whatever. And people think, oh, he's having a great time. In other words, they think maybe I'm alive and maybe I'm not. Maybe I'm really just faking it. So is that alive? So I'm going to make an executive decision that aliveness is what's authentic to me. It's not whether I appear to be alive to other people. It's whether I have a feeling of aliveness inside of myself and whether I show it or not. I might go to, let's say, an IS meeting and decide, well, I want to be careful today. I don't want it to be too much about me. I'm going to sit in the background and be quiet. Doesn't mean I'm not alive. Just might not be showing it so much. Yeah. What do you think of that so far, Jochen?
So first, Bill, right this moment, I'm feeling already having for today, the time of my life. uh, and part of it is the way, I think, the way that you express yourself, your facial expressions. But since I already kind of like have seen that, I can even close my eyes and just in the inflection in your voice, I can hear, or I'm projecting into it, a playfulness into your voice, a kind of uh young, it's a younger quality, and it feels really fun. There's a kind of fun to it. So I just wanted to get that out of the way, and then let's get to what you said. Yeah. um Very clearly, have a very similar experience of my inner state potentially being very different from what's on the surface, and that my sense of the quality of aliveness, let's for a moment forget the quantity, but the quality of aliveness, is very much what my inner experience is. And so, just to give you an example, I think it was about 3, 4 years ago. I was on a walk and I came to a place at the waterfront, right? I think it's East River, and the moon was in the sky. And there were like at that moment hardly any people around me. And for whatever reason, it just really struck me how the water is kept on the surface of the earth and the moon is hanging somewhere in space, and they're kind of like swirling around one another, and the magic of that. And as I became really aware of just like how crazy it is that that is happening, and I'm just like this little grain of dust on the surface of one of these two bodies floating around on my feet, something was going on inside of me. Some really kind of strange sensation of like, wow, this is so much magic here. I'm observing magic. And it really struck me as like a very, very intense feeling all of a sudden of just like the serendipity, or I lacked the words, but there
Mhm.
was a very strong feeling. But I was just standing still, watching the scenery. I wasn't doing anything at all, and yet inside of me, I had this incredible sensation of just like how wonderful, how crazy, how marvelous, how inexplicable. Uh, and I'm part of this. I get to witness this magic show, the fireworks of the universe, for my pleasure, kind of. And I recall this because it was a very intense experience for reasons that I can't explain. Because, I've had the same view so many times. And then one day I look at it and it creates this explosion of pleasure inside of my body, chest, whatever. Somewhere inside it was going on. And so for me, one of the words that I now, as I'm speaking about this, that comes to mind is the word intensity. So for me, there's a flavor of aliveness, and then there's an intensity of aliveness, because sometimes the flavor will be very, very different, and yet I feel intensely alive about something. So maybe one thing in addition to what you said, where I completely am with you, it's on the inside rather than what I'm showing, because I also had moments where I was on the outside very almost hyperactive, but on the inside I felt like this is all so silly. Can I please get out of this as soon as possible? Like I imagine like the circus animal feels, right?
Mhm.
You are being trained to perform a trick, and yeah, I'll get my bite at the end of it, but this is just so stupid. Why am I doing any of this? Fuck it, right? There's no real enjoyment there. It's just like the production of a behavior that I've learned how to do in order to get a reward at the end and not to be punished. Thank you very much. but there's no real connection to the meaning that I otherwise experience in my life. And so maybe that's another piece I would want to add is that for me, strong intensity of aliveness typically has to do with some inferred sense of meaning or some inferred sense of something is going on that means something, that has a significance of some sort that I can't explain necessarily, right? I'm not in a position to say I understand the meaning, but where my body tells me, pay fucking attention. This matters. This is important.
I don't know. Toward the end of that, I was starting to see a contradiction, but then
Okay,
but
now, now,
but
now it's getting more alive.
life is filled with contradictions. Um, Early on, I was just going to, and not really sort of jokingly, just label that in today's terminology, what you described to me is something I think people call awe, right? You know, they say, go out and experience, have an awe moment, go out and, and I do that myself. I go out and I enjoy my hikes in nature and I like to get lost in it and feel how beautiful nature is and then sort of have maybe something that's bothering me sort of melt away for the time being. And so that's like, awe, right? Um, but it is kind of circular or contradictory that you could, for example, be in awe of like the universe, but then also at the same time be realizing just how insignificant you are, right? But if you're insignificant, then what meaning is there to life, right? You have no impact. I have no impact on the world as an individual. I feel powerless about so many things. So, how do I find meaning if I feel that I have no effect? So where does my aliveness come from? Or, sadly, and I was talking to someone important to me recently about suicide. You know, how do we decide that there is meaning to our life and that we have some kind of impact that's worth sticking around for? Some people decide they don't. And so, yeah, flavor and intensity, I wrote down. When I look over here, it's because I've written something on my pad of paper. Um, Flavor and intensity, you know, flavor is a way of labeling or naming different types, if you like, of aliveness along maybe some axis, and the intensity is just. But then I come back to is it internal intensity, like I'm just feeling really feel alive, or is my external intensity like I'm out there really showing it. It shows in my face or my smile or in the tone of my voice or whatever, as opposed to, what I might be feeling.
So I'm really glad that you pointed directly at the beginning to this contradiction. Um, and I'm just experimenting now, or whatever it is that I'm observing is experimenting. Let me even put it that way, because this is so strange now that when I use the word I, because what I'm at least trying to sense into is maybe one of the most important qualities of aliveness is the quality of witnessing aspects. And I can even tell, from personal experience that some of the most significant moments in my personally relevant life, so not like the moon hanging in the sky and me observing that and feeling like how great, how wonderful and how awesome, but really things that happened to me, to this kind of like meat and body back that I label Jochen Weber. The most significant moments were actually not even maybe when it happened, but when I could share it with someone and that person listens to it and that quality that I get from that exchange, right? So when I talked to, for instance, one of my best friends about something that happened to me, and then I can, in the telling and in his response, in the quality that I get from the way that I am being witnessed, that seems to create an experience, yeah, like where there's a kind of nakedness to it. And in this experience of like being witnessed in the most raw form that I can present myself in that given moment, and then not having the experience that that is disgusting or fear inducing or, like uninteresting, it's boring, but rather someone can just look at that and, and be with it. And, one of the phrases from Intention Society is being with it all. And, it sounds maybe a little trite or trivial, but if someone can be with my experience, especially if like experiences that felt tight in the moment when they happened, and then I can unpack that and someone is with me in those moments. Yeah, those are probably among the most enlivening, or where I feel most blessed or something.
Hmm.
And so I'm even as I'm saying that, I'm wondering to what extent my my faculty, or my sensibilities around what gives my life the most meaning is almost this kind of witnessing quality, like being witnessed in my idiocy, in my folly, in my ridiculousness, in my failings, in all of those moments. If I can just be witnessed, and like, and of course, there's quickly comes this word to mind: not being judged, non-judgmental. But I'm even wondering, I don't even think that that is the essential quality. Because if in the end someone says, yeah, now that I've seen it all, that was a bit silly or that was a bit stupid, I think I don't mind that someone makes an assessment of it, as long as they can just be with it and don't reject the experience itself as I don't want to experience that. And so for me, there's a difference between a judgment and a distancing. And as long as someone is willing to be with me in the experience, they can judge it for whatever they want. Just be with me. That's, I think, more important.
I was really enjoying that. Thanks. And and as I was thinking about a number of things, it reminded me that this conversation is about us, because it would be easy to wander into some intellectualization about what it
Yeah.
means. And
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
conversation is about us. At the very end, you reminded me of something that I don't know, I saw it on YouTube or something. I just thought it was kind of cute, which is, and I've forgotten the exact people, but it's like, some celebrity, um, takes like a selfie with a homeless man, and he says, he looks up at her and says, I smell. And she says, I smell too. He's like, he's self-conscious about being homeless and not having a shower in a while, whatever. And she's telling him, like, we all smell, you know, don't worry about it. And I think it gives kind of like a sweet idea. Um, Vocabulary, because I'm really tied up on words. You said witnessed a lot. Um, I think the current jargon is to be seen, maybe. We like everyone likes to be seen. And I heard a sort of nuance there, which is it's okay if you don't like what you see, as long as you don't push me away.
Hmm.
And that's nice, because I think a lot of people, in my experience, can't tolerate that. They want to be seen, but they also want to be totally accepted. We, and maybe it's not to say you're not accepted, but at least like, oh, that's kind of prickly, but it's okay. I'll get anyway. You know. Um, so I was sort of caught by that sort of non-judgmental, thing. Um, I was also looking at the screen. I was thinking, choosing aliveness. That is not only just to be alive, but to choose aliveness is that's interesting. Um,
I can
well,
give you the backstory if you want, but
well, no, let me wander, and maybe if I stumble into the backstory, then then it's like an alive moment. Uh, well, there's something sad here because I was also thinking about myself, of course, and realizing that I recently chose aliveness, intentionally in a couple. I mean, I did this just the other day with someone we both know, on a long phone call, and I chose to bring back into the front of my memory something recent that happened that was really pleasurable because I know that I was also being weighed down by something that was really negative, and I didn't want it. And rather than simply pushing it away, I thought, well, maybe I can bring something in that will fill that space better, right? So I sort of recollected or brought back something alive, pleasant. Um, but again, it's still in my mind some of these conversations I've had recently with some people about depression and suicide, and the sort of sadness that some people find themselves in a situation where they're unable to choose something positive or alive. They're just dragged it down by something, and they're unable to do it, or they don't see it as an option, or whatever. I feel some sad. I feel sadness about that. And so, yeah, but choosing aliveness definitely. And I don't know, reading into the story here, the picture looks to me like it's a couple. Looks like a man and a woman sitting slightly apart on a bench. And, what's going on between them? Are they having are they having a together alive moment, or are they having separate alive moments in each other's presence? You know, is that a sunset or sunrise? These are all things that are very important questions.
well, um, how about you choose whether you want to stick with the image or you feel more like the backstory about like the words? Given that I do feel, especially the way that I described this kind of thing of witnessing, and where for me, the image in the background, one aspect that speaks to that is that there is a kind of, it feels to me like an invitation of the other person, where they say, "Hey, I'm here right now. And if you feel like sharing what's going on for you, my invitation is for you to do so. And to the best of my ability, I promise and commit to staying with you in that experience as you go through that, and I won't run away. I can't promise that I like it. I can't promise, like like how my own experience will unfold, but I will stay with you. That is my promise." But it is an invitation and it's very gentle, right? It doesn't kind of poke or prod or force or any of that. It is like the person sitting on the bench turning toward you and say, "Hey, are you all right? Are you sad? Is everything all right?" And I would be here to receive whatever you want to share with me if you're ready, if you feel like doing so. And it has for me a little bit of this kind of last moment of life confessional,
Hmm.
right? Where whatever I have screwed up in my life, the relationships that I've screwed up, the people that I've shunned, that I've hurt, all of that may still be going on inside of me as like, self-judgment, self-blame, shame, all of these things that kind of weigh me down. And then comes someone and sits next to me and says, "Hey, Jochen, I, you know, I, as you watch your final sunset over there, I'm getting a little emotional now. As you watch your final sunset over there, are there things that are still bothering you? How about it? I'm sitting right here with you. Tell me whatever is still weighing you down, and then you feel a little lighter." And so for me, it's the quality of invitation that matters, right? And I think that's kind of why I chose that image. Now, for me, choosing aliveness day to day, that has more to do with a different experience, which is over the past, oh, I don't know, maybe like 6, 9 months, I certainly noticed that in my workplace, I feel often, and this goes back to one of the things that you started with, right? On what's on the other side of aliveness is a kind of deadness. And the way that I interact with people in my workplace, despite the fact that I want to get something done and I'm tasked with getting it done, and the other people are tasked with supporting me. Sometimes they're tasked with supporting me directly with like direct support. Sometimes they're asked to support me by challenging me. But they're ultimately asked to support me in making the best of what I can do with the thing that I'm asked to do. That's, I think, what they're tasked with, right? It would just not make any sense to think that the corporation for which we all work would have any incentive to try to have internal crap going on that would make anything genuinely harder to accomplish. That it just doesn't make any sense. But then when I approach these people, there is this kind of feeling of, on my end, right? I can't exactly say how those people feel, but on my end, there's a feeling of, yeah, that sounds all very interesting, right? So the feeling that I have that I'm projecting onto the other people when I'm imagining what is going on for other people, and then the feelings that I have, I infer that they're thinking something like, yeah, this all sounds all very interesting what you're doing, Jochen, but I don't know. No, no, maybe not. Right. And rather than, for instance, saying, "Hey, there are so many problems in what you're saying. Let's figure them out loud." Choop, 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 choop. And then they can punch holes in my plan or whatever they could do. But we could be actively engaged on something. But it feels much more like, yeah, so, some kind of non-committal, passive, non-aliveness. It's really kind of a lack of aliveness around it. And as I became aware of this, I was like, that sucks. It just fucking sucks. Like, why, for the love of God, would that be the case? And what can I do personally to choose differently? How do I choose moment by moment to be maximally alive myself and to invite other people into their aliveness? Because ultimately, I think that is what I can offer, right? I can offer to other people to say, "Hey, I assume you're having some kind of experience that keeps you from demonstrating, from manifesting more aliveness." And to suss that out with people. And I'm really trying to figure out, most of all, how do I do that skillfully? Because again, it's an invitation. And then, if with people that I know intimately, best friends and whatever, I find that relatively easy. And one complication clearly in the workplace is that there's so many policies, rules, regulations, hierarchy, structure, all kinds of stuff going on that creates an overlay of of a culture of what is permitted. And where I don't want to necessarily say I have to play exactly by those rules, but at least where I have to recognize other people are likely to at least initially want to play by those rules. And so, how do I structure my invitation in such a way that people don't necessarily interpret that as like me trying to coax them into abandoning whatever they feel is safe? And so, this has to do with just like this experience of like safety, right? And so, like in the image of the two people behind me, one reason why I think I chose this is that the guy doesn't like sit right next to and whispers in her ear, "Hey, tell me your secrets." But it, like there is a kind of closeness, and there's also still a buffer by which the other person experiences. There's no encroachment on like my immediate space, so that I have to freak out about this.
Right. I'm assuming you're complete. One of those other label words. I just want to go back. I just want to sit for a moment and like honor the intensity of your emotion earlier and where you were. Um, because I want like you to feel that I was with you there. And I wrote a bunch of things down. You stirred up a hornet's nest here. Um,
Well, then it seems to be alive.
yeah, yeah, that's the problem with hornets. The dead ones don't bother me at all. It's the live ones that bite me. We've established that it's a sunset. That's good. That was really a pressing question. Um, my mind did wander when you were talking about last moments and confessions and so forth to this chain of reasoning I've had with myself. I won't even call it an argument that I've worked through. Some people think, oh, I'm going to write something down and I'm going to seal it in a letter and I'm going to give it to a lawyer and they're going to give it to someone when I die to be opened on my death type of thing. And then I've reasoned that through so many times, like that is just silly. If there's something important to communicate, it should be done sooner, not later. And it's certainly way too late if it's after the fact. It may have been something that would really matter in the present and would affect the future. And so those types of things, I think they're driven by some kind of fear of rejection, or fear of something like I can't admit this right now. And so, that's something that crossed my mind as you were talking about sort of last minute confessions. I'm not a fan of last minute confessions. I like to push myself to be, more alive or upfront with people in the moment. Um, you were talking quite a bit about invitations too. I think I agree that they're important. And I picked up something recently that I thought was really helpful. I think, yeah, helpful because, the very standard wimpy thing is like, how are you? you know, or, something seems to be bothering you is a little bit more pointed. But I kind of like this thing I hit on recently, which is like, what's on your mind? Which is just a really open invitation. Like, okay, what's on your mind? You don't have to reach over and say, I think you look sad or you don't have to say anything. Just like, what's on your mind? I like that. And so I've been trying to integrate that more into my stuff. Um, and I'm bouncing around a bit, but the couple who have a gap between them, um, it also really reminded me of that. Uh, you know, Winnie the Pooh story that I loved. A lot of people are familiar with it. Like, okay, I'm feeling Eeyore right now. I just really don't want to talk. I don't think I'm good company. That, that's okay. I'm going to sit with you anyway. I'll just be here. You don't have to talk. So maybe they're not talking. Maybe he's just looking over at her and she's just having a feeling, but doesn't want to express it right now. And it's enough that he's there on the bench with her. Um, so that also came into play. And then, finally, because you're hoping that I'll stop talking at some point. Uh, I, the choosing aliveness thing, it occurred to me, sadly, um, and maybe this occurs to you when you see this in other people, or maybe your coworkers or whatever. Um, Happens to me, and I regret that it did. I mean, I don't think people are always alive. I think there are people, because I've experienced it myself, who are sort of in survival mode. And they're just doing what they have to do to survive. And this could be some of your coworkers. They're not intentional about their work or helping you in any way. They're not helping anyone but themselves, but not in a greedy sort of sense. It's just they're surviving. It's like, oh, I have to do this. I have to get through the day for myself. And they're not contributing what they could, but they're also not getting what they could out of life. Um, I experienced a period of my life like that. I regret it. And it occurred to me while you were talking that not that I can blame anyone, but wouldn't it have been wonderful if someone in my life had seen that and had invited me somehow to realize that I could be more alive? You know, I mean, it happened by accident, and you know what I'm talking about, I think, but from an earlier conversation, it happened by accident when I, you know, ran into someone 4 years ago that you know, they sparked an aliveness in me that hadn't been there for a while. But what if someone even earlier than that had just done something intentional, had made the right invitation to me? What difference? So if we're aware that these things happen now, do we have responsibility to look for those situations and try to bring aliveness to other people who may be stuck in a survival mode? That's a question. That's my incomplete.
And I have a again, I feel the general experience is somewhat of having an energy reservoir, roughly where my pelvis is, like the solar plexus region, whatever, in this lower belly region. And then every once in a while, something seems to either puncture it or like create some form of like if it was electricity, uh, a conducting line, an energy conducting line is being laid or opened or whatever. And then I feel this charge wanting to come up. And in what you said, some of the words that stood out to me uh, was really kind of like the word spark, right? As not just as an object, but really as an action to spark aliveness. And what that means, like how does that look like? And in your description, and this is I actually I think maybe for the first time in any of these conversations, I actually took a 3-word note. on a piece of paper, and I wrote down witnessing survival mode, where I used my word witness, but then I used your phrase, or like your what you pointed to is this kind of almost witnessing deadness in something that could be alive. And the image that comes now up for me is sitting in the desert, and you are the rainmaker, and you somehow bring about just enough rain for the life that is currently dead just under the surface of the desert to come alive, and then for the desert to turn into a garden all of a sudden. And when you asked, so do I feel a responsibility for doing that? No, I wouldn't say it's a responsibility, but there's a lust. There's a lust to turn a desert into a garden. Like seriously, like even like, as I'm saying that, I can feel just like how sweet or like how intense that feels on my tongue. In my imagination, being the guy who can walk into a desert and somehow bring the clouds with me, and it rains, and then I get to see what happens next. And of course, to do this, I would say to do this in a responsible manner, right? So you don't want to bring an avalanche and then everything gets like washed away in the coming 40-day flood or something. But you do it in a way where whatever the desert is, they get to experience, ooh, I could also be a garden. And then yeah, so like now that you know how to grow, I'll come by every once in a while. I would love to see you green each time I come by even a bit more, right? But again, in this kind of playful invitation way, where the responsibility lies with the piece of land to figure out how to get into a cycle of rain and clouds and growth and whatever, right? So you can't be the rainmaker for the rest of the desert's kind of existence, maybe, but at least to demonstrate this is what could be going on here. How about that? And yeah, for me to learn that rainmaker skill, that sounds well worth my time and effort.
I was taking in your analogy, which doesn't quite line up with mine, which is fine. We have different views of that. Uh, but because I mean, I'll enlighten you because in my mind, I'm thinking more of a moment, what I call a butterfly moment type of thing, or not something sustained. Like I'm a rain cloud and I can come back and I can be more what it's more like. There's a one-time event where there's a breakthrough, where you can help someone have a breakthrough that, oh, you may not be aware of this. You want to say it like this, man. You may not be aware of this, but you look like you're stuck in survival mode. And, you know, can I help you see something, lead you towards some aliveness? Can't make you drink. I can lead you to water, but I can't make you drink. And then, okay, now you're on your own. You push the bird out of the nest. It learned that it could fly. Um, but my thoughts also got not quite derailed because I'm relatively good at doing multiple things in my head, but distracted by the idea that having discussed it and experienced it, I might be more intentional about this myself, but I'm I'm going to state this as a fact, which is hard for me, but I know for a fact that people do this by accident. and they're unaware of what they have achieved. And I try to mirror it back on them a little bit just because I think it's important to be thankful for things. And so when I see a moment like that, I try to just say, in choosing the right words and the right timing, that, that thing you did, that was really helpful or meaningful for me. Thank you. Because sometimes people aren't aware, you know, that that is what they brought to your life. So for me, that's, I don't know, karma would be the wrong word, but it's important for me to give it back. Now, I think I might also have a sense that if I do that, then they're more likely to repeat that behavior with someone else. And so I'm encouraging what I think is a positive thing. Uh, so I don't think that's bad either. Um, yeah, responsibility is probably a poor word that I choose earlier. It might be more that we can choose that this is something that makes our lives meaningful, so we're going to do it with intention, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say that is why this title came about for me, right? So really this
So we're not going to say intentional aliveness because that's too close to.
um
No, I like choosing. I was just joking with you a little bit.
yeah, no, I get that, but as I'm trying to really kind of like let these different variants like land for me. Yeah, at least, and it could just be because I chose this term and maybe I'm still beholden to it, so I'm not discounting that. But for me, the word choosing or choice still feels a bit more active. Whereas like intentional, I can also be intentionally passive.
Right. No,
So
no.
like, and of course, like
I like the
so
word because it implies choices, plural. That is, you're choosing between things, whereas intentional feels more monolithic. Like you just choose, you're intentionally doing something without thought to the fact that you're not doing something else. It's, you're not choosing between two things. You're choosing to do one thing. So, choosing to do A as opposed to choosing between A and B and doing A, that is like subtly different, I think. Yes.
and maybe coming back to, when you said this is about us. And so coming now maybe from the more g- general abstract, the armchair philosophizing side. Yeah, I'm still curious. So in our conversation that we had around friendship last year, there were already kind of a few moments where I felt like, there's probably some overlap in the topics. In part because for me, and I think this was already part of a conversation, so I'm not betraying any confidence. This experience of being somewhat not exactly on the wrong planet, but at least not on my home planet in times earlier in my life in particular. Yeah, they created definitely a wariness of, do I want to be fully alive here? Because it did feel, well, alien almost. There was something about my experience that didn't line up with, I don't know, what my natural inclination told me I could be feeling instead. And so there was just like this very weird, like being in the wrong movie kind of feeling, or like whatever, where it's just like, what is going on here? This cannot be what it's supposed to be. Like just something felt off, or it's so difficult to find the right words. And I think out of that broad backdrop experience came certainly a choice to withdraw from that quite a bit and to live a life that was more or less, something is going on outside in the world that I cannot really wrap my head around. I have such a hard time grokking why, if we're all the same species, how can these people, if I'm a person, how can these other persons do that? That seems so bewildering. And out of that bewilderment came like, well, and I have to better stay a little away from that because that's just like, that doesn't seem to be my crowd in a certain way. And for really quite a while, it led me to be, well, a bit of a wallflower, where, especially I would say between roughly the age of 16, 17, and then pretty much until I came to New York at age 32, 31, 32, and then really kind of even the first 3, 6 months while I was here, until almost really until I took the step encouraged by a colleague of mine who witnessed some aspect of me, which is like my homosexuality. And she pointed it out to me. And I was like, initially, like, oh. And it's not as though I come from the gay planet and the planet wasn't gay enough. No, I think it was about something else. But that was one aspect where at least I felt weirded out by it seemed so obvious to me, for instance, that yeah, some people are gay, some human beings are gay, and yet everyone is creating this kind of unnecessary forcing function around it as though anyone would be helped by that. And that type of experience is not just about being gay. That type of experience is there about pretty much anything that deviates from certain norms in a certain way, by which people seem to have this preference of being shoved into a very tight space, and that the cultures do that. And it just seems so like, why are we doing this to ourselves? And right. And so like, it was just like bewildering, this kind of like experience. And so I was clearly for, yeah, a good chunk of my life, like 15 years or so, not nearly as alive as I could have been.
Right. Actually, I'm sensing a gap, so I'm taking it. I'm going to point out whether you that my story was at that moment that that person said that to you, that was the thing. Someone flipped you from survival
Yep.
mode into aliveness.
It certainly was, I think, the spark that then
Exactly.
created the flipping. You know,
It's just a moment. They don't have to sustain it. They don't have to do it again.
mhm,
Uh, a bit flipped in your brain or whatever,
yep,
and you got there. You said so much earlier, and because we've talked before, I'm assuming that I'm understanding it maybe better than I am. But the things that I related to, you said like natural instinct, for example. I found for myself for so long that natural instinct, if you want to think that is authentic, me, that I wasn't acceptable. I just, my behavior, the things the way I express things or whatever just wasn't acceptable. And it was so, it made me angry, but maybe that's more that my father's influence on me because he was an angry person. He taught me to be. I mean, I could have behaved differently, but it mostly made me angry. But and yeah, it would certainly make you feel literally alien or different. We both had that experience. And and of course, again, for survival, if you like, it makes you wary of situations where you're going to get smacked down. So you avoid them, maybe. Um, and so yeah, and then when you said wallflower, it was certainly a good portion of my life where I might go into a social situation and I would hang back, not just the wariness, but I was intentionally observing and studying the aliens, you know, to determine how they behaved and what was acceptable. And so I would appear to be a wallflower, because I would not interact much with people. I couldn't interact with them until I learned the rules. Um, so yeah. And of course, if you're forced, if you find yourself the center of attention because someone points out the wallflower or whatever, then the best I could do at that time was mask, which is just like do what was expected of me because I have not yet, you know, um, got my citizenship because I haven't learned all, all the rules and answered the questions correctly.
Civics test, yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of those are some of the things that crossed my mind as you were talking. The sort of the overlap between our experiences. They were very different, but they still overlap in, I think, important ways. Um, yeah. And the other thing you touched on, so maybe it's worth saying out loud, is you and I have talked quite a bit, and people who might be listening to this at some point in the future will certainly notice that there's some, you know, sideband, communication going on here. And I want to report or state that it's, for me, on my side, it's more about confidentiality. That is, I don't want to talk about certain specific things with you that you and I have discussed, just to touch on them, and then we know what we're talking about, but we're not going to expose the specifics. Um, but they're very meaningful things that have happened for both of us that we've shared.
And so this one person, what she did when I had, been in here in the city, I would say 3, 4 months. Yeah, I arrived February, and then I would say that was like May, June. So like 3, 4 months after I arrived. I would say that was the most practical little push out of the nest that I got. And I would also say there were definitely quite a few influences that at least created in me like a genuine longing for that. So there was already a hunger for that experience. And luckily, this person just like pointed out in one very practical domain, which is just like my sexuality and like how I kept it to myself. And then, not that I flirted with everyone in the office, but at least, people knew and I didn't need to hide it anymore. Let's put it that way. So there was this practical aspect of it. But before, in many, many situations, I think, and many of these actually were through either books or movies or other stories, I would say, right? Where at least I got a taste of it could also look this way, where, yeah, there was at least a very intense desire that got kindled, but it wasn't burning yet, right? It just like it was more, there was a good amount of embers glowing somewhere. And I think part of the difficulty that I was going through early on in my life is really this tension between, on the one hand, especially in moments where I was not with other people, recognizing, yeah, I have this kind of good amount of embers that I'm sitting on, and they're kind of like glowing in the basement. But whenever I go out into the world, I have this experience that there are two fragile. I'm not entirely sure what the best word is, but there was definitely this experience of like that needs to be protected, because if that is shared with the world, it, it's going to be kind of a disaster of some sort. And I'm still also trying to figure out, because I do think when people are in survival mode, in this mode by which they protect their own embers, yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what is the nature of that, the nature of the fairly universally human experience. I would imagine that the embers need to be protected, and that especially other humans can't be trusted with that.
Mm.
Because, it would seem that if everyone has that experience, then it wouldn't, why would it then be so difficult to just be like, hey, I have that experience and you have that experience. Why don't we have that experience together and not feel so damn afraid of each other anymore?
Well, off topic and wouldn't fit in the 2 hours anyway. You could wonder like why has why has there never been a time when there is not some kind of war or conflict going on in the world? You know, um, some people are protective of their embers or do want yours, and you just can't. It's unfortunately, I think maybe idealistic that we're all um in the same boat and wouldn't sink it just because we're in the same boat together. People just do the most bizarre things, and now of course I'm thinking about some present situation and how um mental illness can also affect dynamics, and whether you call it an illness or not, for example, but someone, for example, who might be, well, it's not an example, it's a practical example. If someone is a narcissist who just doesn't matter to them what's happening for other people, it's all about them, literally all about them. Never does anything wrong. Everything is someone else's fault or whatever. Um, how do you engage with that person and say, "Oh, you've got embers, I've got embers. We could just, sit down and commune over that," or no, no, it's not happening. They are not open. So I think and I gave that as a sort of a black and white example, but I think there's a continuum here, and I think there are people who are, more open to the idea that sharing their experiences might be beneficial to someone else, and that matters to them. That is, they like doing things that are beneficial to other people, and people who are at the other end, like, no, it's just that's my baggage. I'm not showing it to you.
It's an interesting opening right now that I see, like, in this conversation. And I want to choosing between A and B, choosing between taking it or leaving it. I'm trying to suss out where's like maybe more aliveness.
Maybe there's
And
C. Have you considered C?
oh, it's already kind of the what's it, the Three Monty problem, um, where the opening for me is: do I want to explore this kind of what I might call the narcissist wound? Because I do sense that there is definitely some cross crosstalk going on, some overlap in this, and it could be really interesting, and it could also go into a completely different direction, right? So I don't know, but let me at least say,
I think it's another galaxy, not even another planet.
Um, the experience that one way in which some people may feel to improve their, not maybe their aliveness, but they they feel that they're at least competently surviving. Let's put it that way, where they're in survival mode in some sorts, and they're doing it competently, is by trying to take other people's embers almost. I that is it exists, and it's very sad. And the best there, I would say, is maybe for me to ultimately, and here's where I would say the word responsibility or accountability, I would say is really important, is to, because I don't think that anyone can take my embers. What someone can do is create a situation where I feel obligated to give them. And so to really fully understand that there never, ever is an obligation to do that. I am not obligated to give my fucking embers. No matter what you say, it does not exist. Right. And so, like, and it's such a difficult lesson to really internalize. So I'm not even claiming that I have learned it yet, but I think that is one of the lessons that I want to learn. Right? No matter how stressed my boss comes into my office and says, like, you told me that you would so and so, like, yep, and now you're upset. So have a seat. Let's talk about what's going on right now and how can I help. But I will not take responsibility for the fact that you think your embers are not on fire the way that you want them to be on fire. Right? I'm just not responsible for the other person's inner experience. And so I'm not responsible in the way that I need to give some of my embers just to make you feel better. It doesn't follow. Just one.
Um, I don't know if this qualifies as aliveness. I'm just going to report that, and stumbles the wrong word because I think there was some intention here. You you said some things that were very relevant for what's going on, and some things that, of course, were just near misses. But um, and for a future conversation. Um, but to risk taking it just a little bit further before maybe we'll bail and go back more on topic. There are two sides to any, didactic relationship, right? And some people part with their embers too easily. They don't place enough value on them, or they have guilt or shame or something that can be leveraged by the other party. And so I think it's easy maybe for us to sit here and say you can choose aliveness or you can choose to protect your embers, but someone pushes the right or wrong, button or whatever, um, you may give up something that you know you shouldn't, but you do it anyway. Um, and those situations are difficult, and I'll just maybe close off the topic by saying, for me anyway, maybe just because of yeah, because I am who I am, and other people might behave differently. Um, it's particularly hard for me to see that happening between two other people. I'm not one of the parties, and I'm protective, but I am powerless. Don't like being powerless. I don't know who does, but in any case, that's a level of upsetness associated with that.
Mhm. And it's a fascinating, no, I don't even know what I want to call it a topic, but an area of experience to explore, right? What happens when you observe an exchange, an energetic exchange between people that, from your perspective, is, let's just say, not good for life, is ultimately not good for either of these people involved? Because, I mean, your understanding of what is happening, they are incurring a debt of sorts that it would be much better for them if they didn't, right? It's almost like looking someone uh, finally having a breakthrough, winning in the lottery, and then going to a casino, and oh, well, next morning everything is gone again. And it's like, it's
Well, you knew they were a gambler. They won the lottery.
and um, I ultimately think that the the choice, the choice to gamble, the choice to give away embers, the choice to be susceptible to guilt, shame, whatever, these kinds of like extractive methods, yeah, like, or addiction generally, I think they all have to do with the fact that in our culture, I think there's very little genuine care and education around this experience. And where people are just not being given any kind of sensibility or tools around. So you have this feeling of aliveness, of being, and that it is valuable to inhabit your being, to be conscious of your being, and to witness your own being in this way. And that can feel really good. And then there are situations in which people create all kinds of circumstances and stimuli around you that may give you the impression that because of something that happened in your past, a previous choice, you are now forced by some kind of like weird external law, because I said so, or like whatever it is, you're now forced into a concession. And that's all bullshit. That's all bullshit. Now, they can say that, right? They can definitely say that. They can say, yesterday I lent you my car and then you drove it against the wall and now you have to pay me back, right? They can say that. And then you can still say, yeah, I drove your car against the wall. All correct. Factually, the assertions all check out. And it doesn't follow that whatever you say I have to do next is what I have to do. It just doesn't follow. It's just like there's no physical law that I'm aware of. There's gravity, electromagnetism, and like a few others, but that I have to now pay for your car is not a physical law. So you have an interesting standpoint there, my friend. Let's talk about it. But it's just not a God given law, whatever you say. And so, but it's very interesting that I think, based on our species evolution, and especially that we have this ability to subject ourselves into a culture where whatever the cultures that we grow up with, we just take it for granted that that is the truth. Right? I'm not questioning whether money is real. Money is real, period. Maybe if I came up from a different culture where little pieces of paper would just be to wipe my ass, I would just be like, what are you guys doing? Like, this is so silly. But I'm just considering it as reality, right? And this is true for so many other institutions, including reward and punishment and who gets to decide and all of these kind of funny little quirks that we have agreed upon culturally, but that are not natural laws. They're just not natural laws. But I'm getting tricked into them all the time. If someone figures out where's Jochen's button to push the shame and guilt button, and then oh here's my embers because obviously I did, I could obviously.
Well, that sounded very alive. Um, but I'm, but I'm going to push. I'm going to push back. To hold on to your embers. Um, well, the thing that I'm really focused on while you were talking, I got a little distracted, but I wrote. You know, the reason I keep the pad here is to write things down so that I don't get distracted. Then I can pay full attention and come back to them. I wrote down the word choice because what I heard is something I don't agree with. Certainly not fully. I think a lot of times we don't have a choice. And um, and sometimes it, as you say, past experience could become some kind of learned experience. It could be explicit or implicit. You know, there could be something about our upbringing that brings that makes us feel shameful about a certain situation. We're unaware of why, just, cultural or familial or whatever. It could be a specific experience that came to mind, this example of I know someone who's aware that they are a really bad passenger in a car because as a young adult, they were in a car accident and broke their back, and it was very traumatic. And so when they're not at the wheel, it's hard to be a passenger. They're just so afraid that not having control of the vehicle that something's going to happen again. They can't choose not to have that fear, and very hard for them not to choose to say, "Oh, don't follow so closely," or whatever it is. So I'm like to think that I'm sensitive to the idea that people don't always have full capacity to choose. And I thought I heard maybe in what you were saying that you feel that people have more ability to choose than I think. I think there's a lot more gray area there and some stuff where really clearly no, there is no choice. Um, and so if people find that button and they push it, I mean they're going to get their pellet or their embers or whatever, because that's just the way it is for that person. Um, yeah, so. But maybe we feel this is a maybe I'm sure there's a correlation between feeling alive and feeling that we have choice and control. I'm betting that I wouldn't feel so alive if I felt powerless all the time or didn't think I could exercise choice and so forth. I would probably flip into survival mode because I just couldn't, you know, make meaningful choices. And finally, there's a little bit of a joke there when I said, "What about C?" Um, I think we may have had this conversation before, but I'd heard an interesting talk once about compulsion, obsessive compulsive, disorder. And I think this applies to me too. I can see an example of it in the past anyway, where you and I may observe someone else and we might think they're making bad choices. They chose A over B over C. And what I try to remind myself of when I see that and I'm about to maybe judge them for making poor choice is like they might only see A. They're not making a choice. They're just doing the only thing they think. Again, this can relate to survival mode. The only thing they think they can do. They don't see B and C as options. They're just going to do A. Um, the real trick, now I'm getting a little, is if we can cultivate some kind of self-awareness in ourselves when we're doing that.
Mhm.
Am I overlooking that I have a choice here? I'm turning over my embers because I have to, rather than, no, I have a choice. It may be a hard choice, but I have a choice. So I don't know. Trying to keep it into choosing aliveness.
Um, this will be like one of those maybe paradoxical statements that doesn't make sense. Um, as much as possible, I want to choose to believe that I have choice because the default that seems to be going on in most cultures is to believe that I don't have choice in many situations, which is almost a choice in itself to believe that, right? If someone offers you and says, "Hey, Bill, you know, of all the situations in your life, so this situation you think you have three choices, this situation you have two, this situation you have five, and this situation you think there's only one choice." Okay, and then so you list all of those moments, and then someone comes to you and says, like, "Hey, Bill, by the way, there's always a plus one or plus two."
Yeah.
And for you then to say, I don't believe that, to think of that statement as a choice. Because you could also just say, oh, let me at least investigate that. Maybe it's true, maybe it's false, but I'm not going to reject it outright. It's kind of, but there is only one choice. Yeah, okay, maybe. Where does the strength of the commitment to that statement come from? At least, it's interesting.
I don't know
So
if it's intentional or not, but you're playing into my analytic brain and my compulsions. The compulsions is the wrong word. I mean, my neurotypical tendencies or whatever. I mean, you've probably heard this before from me. In my education, I did quantum mechanics in college, and the location of electron of a molecule in my nose is a probability distribution. And in fact, there's an insanely low probability that an electron from a molecule in my nose is currently in the sun. Okay. It's possible. It's insanely low. So it's hard for me sometimes to make uh, statements of absolute fact because I know that there's always some infinitely small possibility of something that I haven't thought of or that can happen and so forth. But I think I make a practical distinction, bell curve like, if you like, if that is statistically insignificant, like I've already got choices A, B, and C. There might be a D, but it's unlikely to matter. It's a very low likelihood that it is a scenario that is worth considering. I'm willing to both admit that there's a D and discard worrying about the fact and identifying D. Okay. I also think there are definitely situations where there are only a finite number of choices, and that sometimes there's only one choice. There is no choice. And that just happens, but sometimes. But uh, anyway, that's my belief. So here's how I might apply something like this to something we already touched on. I feel powerless about what's going on in the world. So I have chosen not to ingest a lot of news. It's meaningless. It doesn't matter. Not helpful for me to be up to date on what's happening in the Middle East or Iran or Israel. No, I have no impact on that. I realize I have no impact on that. I choose to reduce my exposure to it so that it will be less on my mind. That's a choice I made. I could have made other choices, right? you know? But that's the choice I made, and I'm sticking with it, at least for now. Uh, but things that are closer to home, literally or figuratively, than the
Than the electron in the sun, yeah.
right, right. The probability that the electron really is in my nose is pretty high. Okay. It, those are things where I think it's for me, I can't ignore my choices, and I do have impact, and you know that's where my energy is spent, my aliveness. Um, yeah.
So there's, for instance, I would certainly say the way that my interpretive stuff about the world functions and tells me to, that not not everything that I can imagine I can choose.
Oh, that's for sure. Absolutely.
Very, very well. Who knows? But that's my interpretation, right? I'm even not saying it's true. All I'm saying is my interpretation of reality, for instance, is I cannot go back in time. I cannot attend to more than like my brain energy throughput allows me to attend to. My attention is finite.
Right.
I cannot attend infinitely. And so clearly, given those already kind of very basic restrictions, right? I can't go back in time and I don't have infinite attention. I need to choose. I need to choose. I cannot
Right.
choose not to choose. So I at least acknowledge I have to choose what I attend to and what I intend. Those things will happen. But then within that constraint, I have a wide range of, like, for instance, my choice of what I attend to. And I would already say a lot of people may not be aware of that they actually have a choice what they attend to. They may have the experience that their attention is more or less guided by stuff outside. And then when the news comes, they pay attention because, well, you pay attention to the news or whatever. It just may not occur to them that there's a choice involved. And this might go too closely into the question of, is there free will, which I find it like a pretty useless question as asked by most people, just because it seems to be like about philosophical nitpicking as to, oh, what is free will, and like none of that seems to be particularly useful to me. What I would say is it is certainly my experience that, and precisely maybe because of those kind of moments that you highlighted earlier in the conversation, that there are these moments where before the moment happened, a person had this kind of general flavor to their life and what happened and how they saw it. And then comes a moment and then they change, they open, and then it really changes dramatically. And now the strange thing is that that moment may not be their choice.
All right.
But then what happens next? Choice opens up. And so to then say that before and after is the same, that for me would be just a claim that is so ridiculous I wouldn't even know who would make that claim.
Someone, there's a probability someone would make it.
Probably, whatever, right? But I think it is so obvious that there are people who, up to a certain point, seem to have this experience of very limited choice, survival mode. And then all of a sudden they seem to get out of it. And it's not the financial situation that changes, right? It is not some material circumstance that changes on the outside, but it is something in the internal configuration of the operating system where maybe a subroutine gets deleted or added, or like something is changed, some evaluation of a subroutine is changed. And all of a sudden, there's this experience, oh, I can do so much more than I thought I could. And there's a surprise and a genuine, like, aliveness all of a sudden. And that's what I'm interested in, right? I'm not interested so much in the philosophical backdrop of, like, do I call it free will? It's just like, I don't care how I call it, but I'm interested in it. Call it what you will.
Well, you're preaching to the choir in terms of call it as you will, because, my favorite word is label, but I don't like labels. I think, you label something as free will or whatever. It doesn't mean anything. What matters is the behavior, so I really focused on, actions speak louder than words, as we say in the United States. Probably have a similar saying over in on the continent. Um, yeah,
And let me add one other thought, and I'd really love to get your feedback, right?
sure.
So, on this label of survival mode, I would imagine that when people a few hundred years ago were on this planet, that the distribution of people in the survival mode was not all that different from the distribution in survival mode now. But, like, at what point would you then say, like, what would be the external necessity for people to no longer feel that they're in survival mode? Because it probably is not how much food they have on the table or whether they have electricity or clothes or heating. That can't be it, because, like, then 90% of people in this country should be out of survival mode by now. So what is it?
Well, you no, I will use the word stumbled again, which is one of my favorites. But no, I think you open. I'm gonna go here quickly, and then we'll close the wound. You and I are in the top small, very small percentage of people in the world. And when I think about the billions of people on Earth today and how it feels like such a high percentage of them are struggling and are probably in survival mode for reasons that are not emotional. I mean, they really like food and roof over their head, and are they going to be alive tomorrow because there's, bombs going off or whatever. You know, we're ignoring that, and we're we're I think we've reduced this conversation, and I think it's okay to do that, to people who could choose aliveness as opposed to those people who are literally in survival mode. Uh, and I think arguably their energy can't be spent, any other way. Um, but assuming that, it's not clear to me how it's changed over time. But as you say, we can't go back in time, so let's not bother. We're here today. We um we may have some influence over a circle of people in our lives. We choose to be alive ourselves, although maybe in the past we were in survival mode. We have a desire, not a responsibility, to lead other people to aliveness because we see what that brings to our lives and we want that for them. That's my summary.
That felt a little cut short at the end, but I'll I'll I'll, I'll take it. Um, my curiosity, or at least it's a hypothesis. It's a hypothesis, and in part because some of the people that I've met in my organization who feel almost, I wouldn't say the most dead, but certainly, like, if I were in my mind to go through, and I don't obviously have access to the salary of all people, or the apartment size or their family situation, but if I were to take a guess at their socioeconomic status, let's say, plot that on one axis, and on the other axis, I would then say from, let's say, deadness slash survival mode all the way up to full aliveness and plot that. I don't think it would be like in the way that like the higher the economic status, the higher the aliveness.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. In fact, I would make the opposite prediction
Huh?
that the predicament is not that the more from a biological perspective that like a genuine alien coming to this planet looking at like people and be like, oh, this is so interesting, like the people who seem to be materially much better off seem to be much more in survival mode. Like, what the actual fuck? Like, it like what? Like, where does that come from? It doesn't seem to be a particularly sensible arrangement.
No, what I heard there, whether it was intended or not, is sort of a pushback to my idea. But I think there is a sharp. I think people who get past the point of being like in physical survival mode, who are actually, have the, the bandwidth or time or whatever you want to call it to uh, make intentional choices, regarding emotional issues. I think you're right. I think there's probably a reverse correlation. I think people who are lower down in the socioeconomic scale probably more alive. They're probably, maybe because I don't know why. It may be that they value it differently. They're just like, oh, I'm so, thankful for what I do have in the world, type of thing. And the more elevated people get, they get distance from that. They just have like no concept of, and they get detached, from that. I don't know. I was thinking about something similar in my mind, just concentrating entirely on finance. So at what point, when you're living from paycheck to paycheck, you know, some of those people will give, a panhandler some money because they remember, God, a year ago I was that guy or whatever, right? Or I could be, or I know someone who is whatever. They're connected somehow emotionally to that. Even if they can afford it, they'll do it, right? And then as you go up, you get like, get a job. And then, and then, you go higher and higher, the more distant you, in general, statistically, you get from empathy, if you like, uh, which, I think is a pretty important quality. Um, and so, for some people, that's part of their aliveness is how they give. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't feel very alive if I didn't think that I gave something to the world. I mean, I can't end, world wars, but I can give to people. And, and money is the least of the things that I could give to them. I, give them time and support and, sit with them if they just need me to be quiet. You know, those are things I can give. And giving makes me feel alive.
I was a little distracted the last. I listened and I think I processed, but I was also holding on to a possibility where I'm wondering whether in this, what I imagine would be a negative correlation of like higher socioeconomic status and lower aliveness on some level, especially for people whose socioeconomic status is really kind of conditioned on the performance of their work within a certain structure rather than being choosing and intentional, but rather just like, let's say the following orders kind of structure.
Hmm. Yes.
And what I was thinking is like similar to in politics, right? Where I think the people who are most vehemently talking about this notion of the difficulty of living paycheck to paycheck are not the people who live paycheck to paycheck, but are the people who don't have to live paycheck to paycheck. But for them, it seems to be very, very painful to witness that. And so ultimately, I think that it is really maybe the, the pain, or rather the not wanting to be with the pain that comes from witnessing the difficulty in the embers, where the people that are the least alive are the ones that don't want to witness their own survival mode. Because my hunch is that once you fully witness it and you become fully aware, wow, I am fully in survival mode here, and you can just like fully witness that, I would imagine you will get out of there almost regardless of what the consequences are. Because, like, what is the benefit of being in that mode? I mean, it's not as though you're making better choices, I would say.
I'm not certain where my mind goes here. I don't know if it would ordinarily go here. This may be conditioned by things that have happened in the last couple of weeks.
And it's because for me, this mode is evolutionary still with us when we were prey, when we were literally having the 20 seconds, 30 seconds, maybe 5 minutes running away from a predator. And in that moment, in that very moment, spending a lot of time to be like, oh, A, B, or C, which door is actually like the widest or the ones where the lion doesn't fit through. I do not have the luxury in that fucking moment.
Well, the answer is always A, amygdala.
But if I'm not actually truly, truly in this very moment running away from something, why the heck would my choice be any better if I'm in the mode of like when my brain is trying to run away from something? It's like it really seems very implausible to me.
So here's my problem. Here's what I'm struggling with in my mind. I'm thinking mostly about I chose the term survival mode intentionally, but thinking more about emotional survival than physical survival. So not quite the same as the fight or flight that's built into us, although we have the same knee-jerk reactions sometimes. And I'm thinking, sadly, as you were talking, my mind went straight to that there are some people that if you pointed out to them, hey, you're in survival mode, their option is suicide, not to suddenly say, oh, I could do better. I could choose to be alive. I could embrace life. I could have a moment of awe in nature. Like, why the hell am I here if I'm just surviving? I don't have an answer for that. And
Yeah, I
and
my answer would be not to ask in that particular way. I my question would be more, uh, aren't you tired?
well, we're the same mind here. I'm just saying my intention, and it is intentional, is that I will sometimes, sort of lead the horse to water type of thing. I might place something in front of someone to see if they have a self-awareness of it, rather than pointing it directly out to them. My desire is that they will see it and that they'll recognize it as something that they don't want and that they'll want to make some type of change. But I can't make that happen. And the example I gave is a downside to pushing too hard. Like if you just really make it obvious to someone, like you're throwing your life away, you're making terrible life decisions. What the hell are you doing? It's like, nope. I'm not going to make better life decisions. I'm just out of here. That's not a good option. So I think we're of a like mind there. And I hope that a lot of people are like that. But
And in addition, I wanted to say, right? So the way that you phrased it just now, hey, you're throwing your life away. It's a terrible decision. That for me is not the being with witnessing, because you're literally saying, I don't want to watch that. Looking at your life, that looks terrible to me. I don't want to see that happening, right? It's not a what is going on in your life. It is not a curiosity of like,
well,
can I
I'm
from
willing
what?
to see it, but I don't like it. Those are different things.
But that's the thing. Are you willing to see it?
Yeah,
Because the things like you're throwing your life away, that doesn't sound very much like I'm willing to be with that show much longer.
I threw that out to push your button. You made the extreme, made the extreme statement. It's not the statement I would make. Playing with your aliveness,
Yeah.
poking it.
Like for me, right? If I wanted to play with it for a moment, not that I'm gonna have anyone in mind with whom I'm gonna do this, but I'm almost thinking I would ask someone, "What's your shoe size?" What do you mean? What's your shoe size? 9.5. I think you need a new pair of running shoes. You've been running for at least 20 years now, right? Where the experience from the outside is, do you ever have a moment where you just enjoy what you have, or are you just like always on the run?
I'm glancing at the time and I'm thinking, this has crossed my mind several times, and so I'm going to cross it off my list. It didn't make it to the pad, but um, in case it's not obvious, I'm a little bit older than you. You're a little bit younger than me. So one of the things I found out late in life, which some people probably never either have to come to grips with or realize, I have this concept of whether you're, and we could think about percentage at the time, but whether you're active or passive. So you're at work, you have job responsibilities. You don't choose exactly what to do, maybe how to get a task done, but you don't choose the task. That's your job. And so, you have children, they have to get to school. There's dishes to do, there's clothes to wash. I mean, there's lots of things that are put in front of us that we don't have as choices. You could jokingly say, I can choose not to do the dishes, but eventually that's going to catch up with you. So, and then when you retire, for example, the script flips. You have Most of the time you're actively choosing what to do. Whereas for decades, you didn't actively choose what to do. Life drove the bus. And I don't know how that ties into aliveness, except that I think that when people are overwhelmed with day-to-day stuff, it's harder for them to choose aliveness. They're in a variation of survival mode. Okay. Um, and I'm just laying it out there. I'm not saying it's a solvable problem. I think it's something to be aware of.
I do want to recognize, right? So the practical difficulty of living in a in an environment where almost none of the bits and pieces that create the backdrop that makes me alive, food, clothing, water, electricity, the apartment that I live in, like I wouldn't know how to provide that for myself. I don't garden. I don't knit, right? I don't do any of the things primarily myself that keep me alive. Other people contribute that to me. And those people who contribute that are not even people that I know. So I receive 99 point on my biology. Like my emotional needs, I think I'm already kind of, much better in like reaching out to people and like tapping into resources, right? I'm not expecting that someone knocks on my door once a week and is like, therapist, just like exterminator, where like, my emotional needs also are being delivered through the mail or something, right? But, biologically and physiologically, yes, my needs are met by strangers and they're met through this mechanism. Let's just call it economy. And I do think that for a lot of people, that is a source of anxiety. And so I would say that level of anxiety for me is maybe like inversely correlated to experience of choice. Because the more anxious I am, the more will I ultimately feel funneled into choices that I wouldn't necessarily want to make if I didn't have those anxieties, right? If I feel, oh, food will be on the table no matter what I do, then why be pressed into anything? But as soon as I feel, no, I will only have food if dot, 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 if I perform at work, if so and so, if this and that and the other thing, yes, then I feel no choice. And I do think part of the reason why I imagine that people, especially in more developed economies, are having greater anxiety than, let's say, in even slightly less developed economies. And I think there's some data that speaks to that. Is this experience that there's less and less and less that actually is done by yourself in terms of keeping you alive, and that it is other people, and that you, speaking of control, you do not control other people. And my hunch is that, I feel just like biologically blessed that I'm not, I think, biologically predisposed to have anxiety. So I'm not a neurotic or anxious person, which is why I'm not imagining all the time, oh, what if tomorrow the people at the grocery store no longer want to sell me stuff? Or like, and then I'm not saying that that is the general experience of people, but where somewhere in the back of their mind, there's at least this thing going on where, yeah, like I don't trust other people, broadly speaking. And yeah, if that is part of your backdrop, then living in a highly economically developed environment is actually more stressful for you because you no longer have those things in your own hands. And that's a bit tragic, and I don't know exactly what to do about that. Right? That's maybe a piece I don't know what to do. It's just like it's like 21st
You,
century modern life.
you can choose to ignore it.
Yeah, like, and how to say that? Given that there's like, AA, right? It's the serenity about the things that I don't have a say about, and that's one of those things. And yet, I would say maybe similar to someone, right? I like this is from I worked in a psychology department before, and one of the pieces of research that has stuck with me is research that was done under the heading of like the peak end rule, where they did research on, okay, if someone, for instance, has something really good happening to them, is their happiness, does it go up and stay up? Or does it go up and then comes back to a baseline? And how does experience of affect, how does it actually evolve over time? And what is it that people take from experiences to begin with? And what was found is that, first of all, even people who, let's say, have an accident and become quadriplegic, if you ask them about a year later, how satisfied are you with their life? Unless you have this story going on, it shouldn't have happened. Their life has moved on, and they are, it's not as though it is as comfortable and as easy as it was, but like their general experience of life hasn't all that much changed necessarily. And similarly, if you win the lottery, yeah, you're not like yoo-hoo for the rest of your life. It's just like it doesn't, like, you just create, there's just like you return to some kind of baseline. And similarly, what remains typically for people most in memory is like the peak of an experience and pretty much how it felt at the end of the experience, right? And so to just recognize that the specifics of experiences may matter less than what we extract from them and how we then interpret that going forward. And knowing that a little bit about like how this seems to be working up there, what is it then that can still be changed in people's interpretation? And so, for instance, what my colleague did when she sparked the embers into a bit of a more of a fire is just to suggest to me that my interpretation of the environment might be off. And, now looking back, she was spot on. And yeah, I don't want to be in the position of telling people you're wrong to be in survival mode. Because it's also not my choice, right? It is not my choice to make. But to at least point out there could be a choice.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So,
And
um,
one last thing that also came
sure,
to mind
sure.
earlier, right? The person that you and I have talked about that you had the long phone call with, she might be someone who I would imagine has been running a lot from some of the things that you shared about this person, right? Where
Maybe
it's
talking
always,
about two different people, which is also just delightful.
but where the person who seems to be always juggling too many
Okay. Yep.
things going on, right?
Yep. Yep.
And where, yeah, to just even like consider, as much as the person may say, I have 20 kitchens and there's dishes everywhere. But why do you think that you have 20 kitchens? Why is that your responsibility? Like, don't you have enough with one kitchen?
Maybe they do have 20 kitchens. Anyway, so you touch it. I'm gonna this may come out as playful. It's meant to become as playful, but so with no time left to think about it, I'm gonna throw a whole different axis out here that has crossed my mind several times, which is, based on the principle that there are only 25 hours in the day, um, we didn't talk at all about how we prioritize things. And that is a choice also that aligns with aliveness. If you feel you have to prioritize something that doesn't bring aliveness to you, but you feel for whatever reasons you have to prioritize that, um, is that a choice? Or did you choose appropriate priorities, or were they baked in like you just didn't have a choice? And how does that affect our feeling of aliveness and whether we have the choice to choose aliveness?
Yeah, I can give you a 20-second quip, but the the quip would be, for as long as a person feels that the way that they're choosing isn't creating aliveness, I would say that they haven't thought it through enough. Because it could be that it is the choice that they want to make, and then it will actually create
They
aliveness.
didn't think it through enough because there are only 25 hours in the day, and that would require 2 more hours.
Yeah, the people that I'm thinking of, they're also scrolling enough on YouTube or whatever. So it's not as though I think they don't have time. They don't have time. It's just I think they don't want to think about it, or they can't think about it, or like something. But it's not
Yeah,
like
touche. Oh, well, uh, another wonderful chat. There's stuff I still want to talk about. It's off topic, so we'll have to have another conversation at some point.
sounds good, Bill.
Uh,
Let's do that. Thank you so much for making time today, for choosing to make time today, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Me too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.